These were the most commonly missed questions on the third quarter benchmark. Alright, this was the most missed question, justifying steps in an inequality. So remember, this is no different than if it were an equation. The only difference is that some of them are going to say property of inequality instead of properties of equality. Okay, so this one, instead of being a drag and drop problem where you put it next to the steps, they're just saying select all of the properties that justifies the work between step 3 and step 6. So you could kind of think of it as, just break it down like you would for a drag and drop. So between step 3 and step 4, well, negative 4x plus 0 is equal to negative 4x. That is the addition, the identity property of addition, because anything plus 0 is just itself. So that takes care of that one. From step 4 to step 5, we are multiplying by negative 1/4 on both sides, so that's the multiplication property of inequality. Notice, same thing as multiplication property of equality, only we say inequality because these are inequalities. And then from step 5 to step 6, well, anything times its inverse, okay, so it's reciprocal, negative 4 times negative 1/4 is just 1. That is the inverse property of multiplication. And some of you, I think, chose identity property of multiplication because from step 6 to step 7 that's what's happening, but you have to notice that it's asking you to go only to step 6, so you could only pick those 3 to get this question right. Alright, which equation represents a line with a slope of negative 5/4? So notice all of these equations are in standard form, and in order to figure out what the slope is, I need to put them all in slope-intercept form. So to do that, I'm just going to get y by itself. And actually the first one has a slope of negative 5/4. But just to make sure, we should test the other ones. So here I end up with negative 5x divided by negative 4, and I get a slope of positive 5/4. Here I end up with negative 4 over 5, and here I end up with positive 4 over 5. So it's definitely the first one. But don't forget that if they're in standard form, you just need to think, put it in slope-intercept form, get y by itself. Okay, systems of inequalities. So notice all of them over here are very close. There's just slightly different things changed for each system. So one thing we can do is eliminate some choices right off the bat. So notice one of the lines is dotted and one is solid. So we know it can't be B because those would both have to be solid lines. And then also remember that in the shaded area are points that should make both equations true. So I could pick 0, 0, that's an easy test point, or I could pick 1, 1, whatever you think is easiest, to see which is going to make both equations true. So for A, if I plug in 0, 0, well, 0 is less than 16, but 0 is not greater than 8. So it can't be A. The last two, if you plug in 0 to both, it actually makes both true. So I'm going to plug in 1, 1 and see what happens. So if I plug in 1, I get 3 minus 4 is negative 1. Well, negative 1 is less than 16. 4 minus 8 is negative 4, so that's less than 8, so that works. 3 times 1 is 3 plus 4 is 7 is less than 16, and 4 minus 8 is less than 8. So I still have to figure out which one of these it's going to be. So what's going to help is if I put these in slope-intercept form. then I can figure out which one actually matches it. So to do that, I'm going to get y by itself. So I get y is greater than or equal to, because if I subtract 3x and then divide by -4, I get 3/4 x minus 4. And y is greater than, because don't forget you have to flip it if you divide by a negative. So minus 4x divided by -8 becomes positive 1/2 x minus 1. So y is greater than or equal to 3/4. So that one is not going to work, because they would both have to be positive lines, and notice the solid line has to be a negative line. So let's just double check with the last one to make sure. But if we get y by itself, on the top we end up with y is less than or equal to negative 3/4 x plus 4. And on the bottom we get y is greater than 1/2 x minus 1. So again, we have the negative line, y is less than that, so that's below, and y is greater than the positive line, so that's the only overlapping area. So it had to be D. And that was a lot of work. But use your test points, use what you know, put everything in slope-intercept form, and do not forget that if you divide by a negative, you have to flip the sign, because that's what made the difference in making it option D and not option C. Okay, same thing here. When you are dividing by a negative, you have to flip the sign. So to solve this inequality, I'm going to get all the x's together. So I get 13 minus 12x is less than or equal to 49. And then if I subtract 13 from both sides, I get negative 12x is less than or equal to 36. So then to get x by itself, I'm going to divide by negative 12. And when I divide by negative 12, I'm going to flip the sign. So x is greater than or equal to negative 3. So because it's less than or equal to, right off the bat I know it's not A or C, because that has an open circle. Remember, if it's less than or equal to, it needs to be filled in. So x is greater than or equal to negative 3 would be D. Everything bigger than negative 3. Okay, this one I think a lot of people missed because you didn't see the plus z on the end. I think you just did the absolute value and didn't see the plus z. So if I plug this in, I get absolute value of 6 squared divided by 3 minus 14 plus 3. So 36 divided by 3 minus 14. Well, 36 divided by 3 is 12. Minus 14 is negative 2. But don't forget the absolute value of that is positive 2. And 2 plus 3 is 5. So the only thing you had to type in was 5. But again, I think a lot of us didn't see this extra part and just did 2. So make sure you're reading very carefully. Okay, computing polynomials. This is what we just did, and I think we might have been a little bit confused by the format. But remember, if you are multiplying, that's where we drew out the box every time. So even though they've done most of the answer for you, you're not going to figure out that missing blank unless you multiply everything out. Okay. So when I do that, I get m cubed, 4m squared, 2m, 3m squared, 12m, and 6. So what's already over there is the m cubed, the 7m squared, and the 6. So the only part missing is the m term. So 12m plus 2m should have been 14m. And even though you're typing in a variable, that's something you can still do. So if you just type the number, that would be why you got it wrong. Okay, this one goes back to something we did a long time ago, which is graphing inequalities or equations using x and y intercepts. So whenever you see a graph like this where it's just that first quadrant, they're definitely graphing using intercepts. So if we look at this situation, Joseph wants to buy cakes and pies from a local bake sale. Cakes cost $12.75. So notice cakes are on the x-axis, so I'm going to do $12.75x plus pies are $8.50. They're on the y-axis, 8.5y, and would like to spend no more than $170. So in other words, that's going to be less than or equal to $170. So we know that it has to be shaded below because it's less than. So it's not going to be A, it's not going to be B. And now the only thing to figure out is which is graphed correctly. So to find the x-intercept, we make y 0. And if we solve for x, we get 13.33, which would be about here. And then if we find the y-intercept, make x 0, 170 divided by 8.5, we end up with about 20. So on the y-axis at 20. So that's what tells me it's going to be letter D and not letter C. Okay, interpret statistics. So Mr. Thomas recorded the number of sit-ups that his students could do in a specified time for each class period. The data for his first period class is shown below. It has a mean of 18.04, a standard deviation of 2.86, and a mean absolute deviation of 2.5. Technically what they might have wanted you to do was to type in all of these values and find the standard deviation for each of these A, B, C, and D to figure out which one had a standard deviation of 3.99. But another way to think about it is, okay, so all of them are centered about the same place, so the mean is about the same. So if this one up here has a standard deviation of 2.86, remember, a bigger standard deviation, like 3.99, is going to be more spread out than that. So it's definitely not C, because that's even closer together than the one up here. And D looks just like that one. So really, it comes down to A or B. And A is more spread out. So to be sure, what we really should do is go into our list and actually enter all of these. So we would do a 10 twice, 3 12s, 2 14s, and so on until you put all of this in. And then remember your one variable statistics. Okay, we'll give you your standard deviation, which looks like the O with the tail, the little sigma. And so that's how you could have been sure, but really that's a good way to reason through it, is which one's more spread out.